This is admittedly a huge departure for the Bowling Oldies channel on YouTube, but I've long wanted to thank the subscribers of this channel and to answer a few questions. So at the risk of seeming a bit self-indulgent, let me begin by answering the most obvious question I get occasionally. Who am I and where did I get all these videos? Well, most of the videos I post are right out of my old VHS tape library from the days when I used to record pretty much any bowling telecast that came on TV. As for who I am, well, the answer to that question might help answer a lot of questions about this channel. My name is Randy, and I've been in broadcasting for over 40 years. Today, I'm a voice actor. What's a voice actor, you might wonder? Well, I sit around all day in my studio saying silly things like, the best mix of the 80s, 90s, and now, or the news watch never stops, or whatever my clients, mostly radio stations, ask me to say. As Bugs Bunny once said, it's a living. My interest in bowling dates back almost to the time I first learned to walk. My dad used to tell the story of how, as a 4-year-old, I would sit in front of the TV watching bowling, and I would turn down the sound and do play-by-play. Heck, I always thought I would be the guy to replace Chris Schenkel on Pro Bowlers Tour, but that never quite worked out. By the age of 6, I was bowling in the basement on a lane my dad had built for me. We used to hold little kid tournaments on that lane, and I'd pay neighbor kids a penny a frame to set pins. I guess the first time I went bowling at a real bowling alley, I was about 6 or 7. My mom took me to Lucky Strike Lanes in Kansas City, where she bowled in a women's league. The ball sure seemed heavy at the time, and I remember my first score was 52, an easy number for me to remember since I was born in 52. One of my favorite toys growing up was an Eldon Bowlomatic I got for Christmas one year. I found this clip of a Bowlomatic on YouTube. Man, that old machine was really cool, especially given how there was a real fascination back then with the automatic pin setter, which was still considered a modern marvel. I started bowling in bantam leagues pretty much as early as kids were allowed to do so. I guess I was 8, bowling at King Louie Ranch Mart lanes in Leawood, Kansas, and I continued bowling in junior leagues through sometime in junior high school. I still have my last bowling shirt with all my junior bowling patches sewn on it. Here's an I Beat the BPAA All-Star Award, and in 1965 that would have been Dick Weber. A High Series Award, High Game Awards, League Championships, League High Game Award, and others. Man, those were good times. And I remember watching pretty much any bowling show that came on TV. There was a local show in Kansas City called Bowlin' with Molin that originated from Plaza Bowl, hosted by a local TV personality named Sam Molin. The show's format is a distant memory, but I do recall that the local residents who competed and won would get to shoot at the Schlossman Ford jackpot shot, usually the 6-7-10 or 4-7-10 at the end of the show. I guess they were trying to win a new Ford. Another local show on Kansas City TV was the King Louie Show, which was videotaped at King Louie East Lanes and pitted local area PBA players against one another in an opening match for the right to meet the reigning King of the Hill in the second match. Hosted by a local TV celebrity named Mickey Finn, I remember my dad took me to a couple of tapings of this show. Local pros in Kansas City at that time included Dave Sutar, Bill Chase, and others. But my favorites, who were often on the show, were Dan Steffi and J.D. Hill. I remember one time we were at the taping, and I snuck down to the settee area where the bowlers were sitting, and I sat down next to them. Nobody seemed to mind too much. Either that or the TV director and the bowlers figured it would appear a bit unseemly to chase off a little kid, so they let me sit there through the whole show. Man, I'd love to get my hands on a copy of one of those telecasts, but I'm sure they don't exist. Of course, we got the syndicated series Championship Bowling with the legendary bowling commentator Fred Wolf on play-by-play. And on Saturday nights right after boxing on ABC, we'd watch a little 15-minute show called Make That Spare with longtime nightclub entertainer Johnny Johnston on the call. Of course, ABC began showing pro bowling on Saturday afternoons in 1962, and for many years I never missed it. I even remember seeing old film shorts of some of bowling's early stars like Ned Day and Andy Varapapa. I've posted some of those videos on this channel. I drifted away from bowling in high school, but it wasn't long after, sometime in my early 20s, that I decided to set my sights on becoming a PBA member. I never had designs on bowling as a career. I had a career in broadcasting. but I wanted to see if I could compete at that level and to be able to one day tell my grandkids that I did. I bowled in my first scratch tournament in 1978 at Forum Bowling Lanes in Grand Prairie, Texas. The format was a 10-game block with the top 4 finishers receiving a spot in the PBA's Quaker State Open. It was my home house, and I knew those lanes like the back of my hand. My coach said I'd need to average 230. I said, "I've never averaged 230 for 10 games in my life. Are you kidding me?" But sure enough, I averaged 230.5. But in the 10th game, I kept leaving 10 pin, 10 pin, 10 pin. So, knowing I was close to the number, I nudged my feet a little bit on the approach, hoping to force a double, and I Greek churched. I missed the top 4 and a spot in the tournament by 4 stinking pins. Then on Memorial Day weekend that year, I bowled in my second scratch tournament and finished 6th. I struck out in the 10th in one match to tie 1968 PBA Rookie of the Year Bob McGregor, and I doubled in the 10th to beat future PBA star David Ozio. I got my PBA card that year and bowled in my first PBA Southwest Regional Tour event, the Duncanville Open. After a slow start in the first block, I averaged 240 the second day of qualifying, but missed the cut by 10 pins. The next event I bowled in was the 78 Texarkana Open. I led after the opening block and was in second place overnight. I finished 8th. In the next year in Texarkana, I finished 11th. I liked that house. In the summer of '79, I bowled in my one and only national PBA Tour event, the Houston Open. I qualified 25th in the Rabbit Squad to get into the tournament, but didn't bowl well on the tour condition. I did, however, get the first 9 in a row one game, threatening to have a real moment. But it all came crashing down when my 10th ball was DOA, and I left a 5 pin. It was embarrassing, but I did shoot 279. I've had 6 300 games, all in non-sanctioned practice rounds, and all on relatively easy conditions, although the one I shot late one night at Post Oak Lanes in Houston wasn't exactly the easiest of shots. I have 3 800 series, a pair of 803s, and an 847 consisting of 278, 280, 289, including 20 strikes in a row. But in 1980, I went to work programming a top 40 radio station in Dallas, and it gobbled up all my free time. Instead of bowling 100 games a week practice, I was reduced to bowling a game or 2 warm-up before league a couple of nights a week. Not surprisingly, my game fell off rapidly, and soon it wasn't much fun to bowl, so I took up golf. I never expected to take golf as seriously. In fact, my only goal in golf was to get good enough to have fun. But as a newbie golfer, my scores were pretty high, just as my bowling scores were plummeting. I realized I had to choose between bowling or golf, or else my scores in the 2 sports were liable to cross, and I chose golf. I lost interest in bowling once I couldn't perform at a level I was used to, and as new players emerged on the PBA Tour with whom I wasn't familiar, I became more interested in seeing what Tiger Woods was doing on the golf course than I was in what Billy Bob Cranker was doing on the lanes. And then, of course, the PBA went through its own identity crisis. The gold pin era came, and the new PBA operators changed the nature of the sport. Crowds were being whipped up into a frenzy on bowling telecasts, hooting and hollering, even during players' approaches. It less resembled the bowling I knew and looked and sounded more like a cross between wrestling and roller derby. Then, when we were introduced to Pete Weber's crotch chop, professional bowling had jumped the shark and pretty much lost all of its dignity. That was when I turned completely away from the game. From 1999 to early 2012, I went bowling exactly 3 times and watched no more than maybe 1 or 2 bowling telecasts. That's right. Then in January of 2009, on a lark, I launched the Bowling Oldies channel on YouTube and posted a few videos I had on VHS tapes. The first 2 I posted were the 1977 Firestone Tournament of Champions and the 1977 King Louie Open. I was soon hearing from bowling video collectors. I didn't even know there was a community of bowling video collectors, but there is, and I heard from them. And soon I was swapping some of the videos I had for some of the videos they had, and I acquired some really old stuff that predated the home VCR, and it put bowling back on my radar. Then I started receiving some favorable comments posted on the Bowling Oldies channel. affirming what I had suspected, that there was an audience for old school bowling, and it kind of got me thinking even more about bowling again. This past December, I underwent triple bypass surgery and spent the cold winter months convalescing. On Sundays, I found myself watching bowling telecasts on ESPN for the first time in years. On the very first show I watched, Jason Belmonte bowled a 300. I must admit that while I had long been outspoken against what bowling had become with all the crankers and big hooks, I have acquiesced. I'm now fascinated by the modern game, and as I face a long recovery process, it's become clear to me that spending 4 or 5 hours outdoors in the sweltering heat of summertime in the South playing golf is probably the worst thing I could do. So in an effort to find some sort of recreational sports activity, I have found myself unexpectedly drawn back into bowling. Last week I bought a new 3-ball roller bag, and I've just ordered a new reactive resin ball, the first bowling ball I've purchased in 15 years. Soon I'll be getting another ball for strikes and a new spare ball, and since my old Lynn's shoes don't fit anymore, I guess I'll be buying a new pair of Dexter's soon, and I guess I'm back into bowling. I never saw this coming. Those of you who subscribe to the Bowling Oldies channel have had something to do with my interest being piqued, so thanks. Now, to answer a few other questions. Do I trade for bowling videos? Well, yes and no. If all you've got to trade is tournaments from the 70s and later, I'm not really interested. But if you have stuff from 1975 and earlier, that's another story. I'd be willing to discuss it. But I've already got most of what's circulating in the collectors community. Still, I'd be willing to see what you've got to offer. There are 3 telecasts in particular I would love to get my hands on. The 1975 King Louie Open final match in which Mark Roth won his first PBA title bowling a 299, leaving a 4-pin on the 12th ball. And the 1974 Cleveland Open in which Earl Anthony bowled a 299, leaving a solid 9-pin on his last ball. Then Chris Schenkel presented Earl with the stubborn pin that got away. Earl had a look on his face like, "Why the hell do you think I'd want that pin?" Those 2 telecasts are widely considered the holy grail of bowling collectors' videos. If you have one or both of them, I would certainly be interested in talking to you. Then there was a championship bowling episode in the 1960s in which Ray Bluth bowled a 299 game, crossing over and leaving a 6-pin on the final ball. I saw all 3 of these shows when they first aired, and I'd love to see them again. And the other question I get is to post specific tournaments or matches. Sorry, but I don't take requests. I don't have all tournaments, and I don't have all the matches from the telecasts I kept. I only kept the ones that were interesting to me at the time. Well, that's going to have to do it. As soon as my newfound game isn't too embarrassing to show off, I'll post some of my exploits on the lanes. I already posted a short video showing a couple of shots from last week, but my old equipment doesn't fit anymore. The ball feels like it weighs 100 pounds. So I'm certainly anxious to get my new Storm Frantic this week, and then a Storm Manic is in the offing soon thereafter, as well as a new spare ball and shoes. And I can't find the rosin I used to use. Oh, how the game has changed. Back when I was bowling all the time, the biggest question I would have to answer was yellow dot or white dot. It's a little more involved now. But I've been through the same type of equipment fascination with golf in the past 25 years, so I know the drill. And while I don't expect to ever get my game back to where it once was, I do think it's within my reach to achieve the same sort of goal I had when I first started playing golf, to get good enough to have fun at it. And that's what I'm setting out to do. Thanks to those of you who have subscribed to the Bowling Oldies channel. Please feel free to leave a comment. And as they used to always say on the PA system before every shift of bowling leagues, good luck and high scoring to all of you.